Greetings from the Dark Continent, Conscious Caracal here, or Adams Van Sale. And tonight I'm talking to a host that I think many of you may recognize, seeing as we do share largely an audience. He's also a South African podcaster in the information industry, if you will, spreads a lot of good facts and really does excellent analysis on South Africa. He's not a one-man show. He's got a very strong team there over at ManPatria as well. And we're going to get into some interesting topics regarding South Africa and the larger continent of Africa at large. But then also we're going to just talk about what his podcast is all about, what they do over there, and why you should become a subscriber. So firstly, welcome everyone, and welcome to the show. Dumo, nice to have you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Ernst. I really appreciate it. Really, really looking forward to this discussion. Yeah, and let's get it going, man. I'm just really itching, man, right now.
So let's start off. I mean, that's my intro, greetings from the Dark Continent. And that's actually a theme that I wanted to discuss, because Africa is still, and South Africa as well as part of it, still a dark continent when it comes to information. But it's not just people on the outside that seem to be struggling to decipher what's going on and putting one and two together. People on the inside in South Africa also sometimes seem to struggle with what's really going on. It seems like a lot of people are very confused with some of the chaotic stuff they see going on around them. But let's start off with the outsiders looking in, our American and European and all across the world friends checking in, looking at South Africa and Africa at large, and not really knowing what's going on. They seem a bit confused. And as someone, why I'm asking you is like I said earlier, your podcast is centered around providing information, analyzing the news, getting the truth and facts out there. So in your experience, why do you think we have this disconnect between the outside world and the African continent when it comes to what's really going on?
Right. Good question. I was thinking about this when you sent the topics through, and I thought, I just think I think the outside world doesn't really have this. I wouldn't say they disrespect Africa, but they're not really interested in Africa. I mean, because a lot of them are preoccupied with their own thing. So if you look at America, for example, in the US, I mean, you've got, Biden in the media, you got Trump in the media. Okay, now he's off social media. But I mean, you get it. You got all these talking points that are dominating the social media spaces and so forth. And then Africa and South Africa are very peripheral. I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, the only time I saw really Americans talking about Africa is when AfriForum or Ernst Roots went to the United States. And he brought this issue of, farm murders to Tucker Carlson and so forth. And then that's when they spoke about it. And then there was that whole thing about expropriation of land without compensation. That was a big one as well. But then Africa in general, I mean, you would see on CNN and stuff, they'll have these short shows like Inside Africa and whatever, but no one really watches that. No one really cares. I mean, and the reason why I think that is the case is because it's a really like a tourist type of show. And it doesn't really get into the core problems that's occurring in Africa. And look, Africa is a massive continent, so you can start anywhere. I mean, you can.
Yeah, have you seen some of those maps where they take South Africa and they put it over Europe or the United States, and it like takes up most of the map? It actually gives you some perspective on our large, not just the continent, but South Africa itself. It really breaks your brain a little bit.
Yeah, agreed. And I just think that you see, even that type of information, I only figured that out, I think it was 2 years ago. And I was like, I didn't even know that. So even I am ignorant of a lot of things about South Africa as well. And I just think there really isn't like a deep interest from the world. I think Africa is not like, it's not like Europe. It's not like Asia or something like that. It's not... There isn't something that Africa can really dominate in. And unfortunately, because of that, the interest in Africa is not that great. And then therefore, the information with regards to what's happening in Africa also is also problematic. I mean, look, there's one bad thing. I mean, remember in Libya where they had open slave markets, right? And that should be a big thing, but it really didn't hit that hard. I mean, and then there was that time when Obama and Hillary did something in Libya with the Gaddafi. That was also a big one. And it really isn't, I mean, there's that narrative that about Africa just not being there, but I just think it's mainly based on people not being interested. So the outside world, I mean, even when I have other people from outside on my podcast, like I had Michael Hoffman, an American, and I never had a European. I had one European on, and she was very knowledgeable about South Africa because she came here on holiday the one time. But the others, when you tell them what's going on in Africa, especially like the xenophobia, let's talk about the xenophobia, for example.
Yeah.
They didn't even know what the word xenophobia was. And like, what is xenophobia? And
Yeah, they're like, well, you guys, don't you all just live in the same country? Isn't Africa a country?
Exactly.
And Ghana is like a province of Africa, and South Africa is just like a province.
Exactly. So I find that very interesting that someone didn't know what the word xenophobia was, and this person lived in America. And I think that's the thing as well. They're not connected even to the culture. Like, we are plugged into American culture. Like,
Right.
I mean, we see the
we
memes.
can get into that later in the show. I think that's a very important point you make there. But there is something, like I said, to reference my intro again. I say greetings from the dark continent, but then I also say, sometimes I forget to say, I'm here to shine a light on the goings on down south. And I think that kind of leads me to my answer to my own question. And I think that is the fact that, let's say, every information spreading institution or individual or podcast or program is like a little node or like a light source. So whether that be a massive news organization, which is a big light source, or a small podcast that's like a match, they're all creating light on this dark continent, illuminating what's going on. But I think what sets Africa aside from some of the other continents is that there aren't as many light nodes. So we're still in that process of developing all these information centers. So there's not so many people getting information out there. So I think there's a lot of almost like not a centralization, but a poverty when it comes to different types of points of view getting out there. So when it comes to South Africa, I mean, you don't really have a smorgasbord of news organizations that are going to give you news in South Africa compared relatively to other countries like the United States or a continent like Europe. In South Africa, you're going to have a handful of big news organizations that are going to get stories out there, narratives out there. And I think that's a big problem because these news organizations aren't very diverse in regards to their takes on things. They definitely differ on some things, but they are generally on the same page when it comes to their analysis of things, their prescribing of solutions, and how they see problems. And then you get, for example, the sphere that we form part of, this podcasting sphere that's still very young in its development in South Africa. It's been much more established in countries like the United States. And then you get a fresh angle. But like I said, all our little podcasts and shows are little tiny matches and small little flashlights compared to like the massive stadium lights of a big organization like News 24. And I think South Africa, compared to the rest of the continent, has a lot more in regards to information centers that are getting it out there. But there are other countries in Africa that I think are completely in the dark when it comes to this type of infrastructure or people getting news out there. I mean, a country like the Congo, where there's a civil war going on, I mean, there's not a lot of people there getting information or news out. So everyone's kind of guessing what's going on. But I mean, that would be my big thing to add. I completely agree with what you said, but I want to add to that. I think Africa as a whole is also impoverished when it comes to just news generating infrastructure and people getting information out there. Like I said, with the metaphor of shining a light on things.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there's also North and South Sudan that's also like war torn and stuff, and
Yes.
not many people want to go there because it's not safe, you know. But I mean, how do those guys get information? I mean, obviously, the internet penetration into Africa is growing, but not fast enough.
But just it almost only yesterday is when it really started growing. I mean, I remember a time when the majority of people I knew didn't have internet or any connection to the internet. I mean, that's something still fresh in my memory. It wasn't like 50 or 30 years ago. It was just yesterday.
Right. I mean, broadband came to South Africa in about 2006, 2007. And at that time, I was like 16 years old. And I remember when people were talking about broadband and everything. And I didn't have internet at that time.
Yeah.
You know, so it's crazy how the technology has developed very quickly.
Now
But
compare how
Africa,
large a portion of your life is spent online, now how large a role the online world plays in your life, and compare that to just a few years ago where you were just new with this new connectivity. Things are moving very fast, Dumo, and I think it's having a large impact not just on our socializing, but also on our politics as well.
Right, definitely. I mean, even on the politics, we are plugged into the American sense, into the American media. We see what happens on Twitter every day, and it's crazy that a lot of people have even imported some American ideals or American views on certain things. And the nice thing about this is that I remember there was a guy who was talking about. There was a space on Twitter. It had people from the United Arab Emirates, and they were talking about American culture and racism and stuff, and they were trying to figure out like how does this work, you know? And then in another space, I mean, you would have Tariq Nasheed saying that African immigrants into the United States, you know, he was talking bad about them, right? And I remember they even made another space about him as well. And I think that the nice thing about it is that, yes, you got these people communicating and stuff, and you get to understand, but also you get those who just suck everything, as you said before the show. They just say, oh, this guy's got an opinion, let me adopt it. So I think a perfect one is the whole thing about blackface and so forth. You know, in South Africa,
it's not a concept in South Africa.
Exactly. We had Leon Schuster do it for many years, and we laughed, black and white, right? Then all of a sudden, someone found it offensive in the United States. Now all of us have to be offended. Yeah. And you know, that's one of the disadvantages of it when it comes to politics.
Yeah, Dumo, absolutely. Before we continue, I actually want to keep on that topic of the Americanization of our politics, but I want to give the chat some love first before we go on. So Greiling Moelman says Africa is a big place with so many unique areas and unique people. Absolutely. Sideline Opinions says Africans probably know more about America and Europe than they know about Africa. Well, exactly as Dumo said now, we're so saturated with all this information and news and media and culture coming from America and Europe that it's taken over our minds to an extent. And we're going to get into that. I think that's a very important topic. And then also Dagbreker says France, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany all fit into South Africa. Well, there you go. Jeez. And he says Poland is the size of the old Transvaal Republic. Wow, that is insane. But I mean, that's the type of perspective you need. And then Kingfish says, respect to all independent media, open my political eyes. Well, thank you very much. Or you're welcome. And then there was another, and I see Pete Button says legacy media in SA are the mouthpiece for the government, which starves the people from all info. Yeah, well, I don't think they have to be paid. They already drank the Kool-Aid, so they're on the same page as the government, it seems. There was another comment here about new media that I saw, but I think I've lost it now. Oh yeah, no, here it is. Vlakvark says, if you have a phone, then you are a journalist. Community journalism is the next step, especially for South Africa. Well, that's already been something you see in Europe and in America, and I'm glad we're kind of getting on with it as well here in South Africa. I see a Vlakvark also asks, can you have Patrick Deneen on your show? Most important post-liberal writer today. I read his book. It's here on my shelf, and I actually did send him an email, and I am in contact with him. He's currently busy writing his next book, so he's not doing podcasts. But when he's done there, I might surprise you guys with something there. And I see a Sideline Opinion says, I did not receive any early notifications for your podcast today. That's strange. YouTube doesn't seem to want to help me out at all. So yeah, but I think that's enough love for the chat for now. Dumo, let's stay on that topic about the American influence in South Africa. I mean, I remember to see in South Africa specifically where when a bigger political event happens in America, if they're debating, for example, the banning of guns, or they're debating racism in America, or the George Floyd riots, or different types of protests there, you see South Africans jumping on that and almost caring more about those American issues than they do in South Africa. I mean, the death of George Floyd in America got more South Africans riled up, from what I can see, than the death of Collins Khoza in South Africa by the hands of the police. So, I mean, that's something that really stands out to me. What are your thoughts there? What are you seeing happen with this almost cross-pollination and takeover of American and European culture into South Africa through social media?
Right. Yeah, it just shows really how powerful social media is. I remember when George Floyd got killed, they had some people actually decided to actually take it upon themselves in South Africa to actually have their own marches and stuff like that, right? And some did it in Joburg, Central Joburg, and I saw a few people do that. And then I remember Pretoria Girls as well, Pretoria Girls High School. There was people were actually protesting there, and I remember the chant was, "What did George Floyd say? I can't breathe," and they were just chanting that over and over, like harpies, right? And that was a very interesting thing. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. But like not too long ago, I mean, Collins Khoza got killed and no one knew about it.
We didn't even have a protest.
Exactly. We didn't have no protest. And I mean, I remember I covered it on my podcast. Roman covered it. You covered it. Everyone covered it. And they're like, hey, guys, this lockdown is causing problems. And,
this is hitting close to home. This is in our own country where this is happening.
Right. And I think for me, the main problem is just that I think the guys in the American media managed to, they know how to get into the emotions of people. And they know how to kind of get into people's minds very easily. And therefore, people will actually even get angry. Let's say, for example, when Donald Trump won, I was flipping happy. I was like, yay, Donald Trump won.
But he's not even a South African president. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm like, dude, why are you celebrating? You know? And then, and I was like, this is the thing. Like it's almost like as if, it's almost like wrestling, or in a sense, right? Like we get so emotionally attached to these other political. It's like watching a show, right? And you get emotionally attached to these characters, and I think that's exactly what's happening now.
Watching a soap opera.
Exactly. But now this is a different type of soap opera. A soap opera. This is one where now it's like implications in real life.
There's stakes.
Yeah, exactly.
Real stakes.
Exactly. And I think that's why people just love to talk about it. It's the same thing with Game of Thrones lore and everything like that. So I think ultimately, just to conclude on this point, I think, the Americanization of our politics in South Africa is quite evident. And I think if people just left social media, they wouldn't even know about half of these things. But I think social media has a massive role to play. Of course, if you go onto, let's say, Facebook or Twitter, and again, you're gonna and you follow all the big news organizations because you want to stay up to date. You're going to also take their politics in as well, and it shows. Like I remember one time when I walked into the office at work, and then they had TVs all around, and they were playing CNN, and I'm like, why are you guys playing CNN? And then some dude's like, dude, it's just the news. What the hell? I'm like, oh, flip. Yeah, social media. Because why? People just don't like CNN. But some people don't even care about CNN's politics. And they're not on social media as much as me. And that's why they are not so affected. So, yeah, it does have a massive effect on my life as well. Yeah.
Before I continue, I also just want to greet our good friend Sigle Ngobise, Big Daddy Liberty. He's tuned in. Goeienaand, very nice to see you. Thank you very much for tuning in, Sigle. And he also says something very pertinent. He says, the funniest thing is those who will view Black Americans as more African than Afrikaners. Well, yeah, that's the big irony, is that we literally have Africa in our name, but Black Americans they rather view themselves as more African, or South African. Some South Africans would view them as more African, even though they're completely Western. They're Westerners in regards to their culture. They don't speak the language of their forefathers. They don't have the same religion or culture. They're completely Americanized and Westernized. And I
Right.
see Sigle also says another important point. He says Afrikaners literally built major segments of South Africa, yet you'll see the left argue that some random black dude hooked on crack in Harlem cares more about Africa. Yeah, well, Sigle is bringing out the spice. He's not holding back. But thank you very much for your comment, Sigle, and for your
I want to
adding to the show. Yeah?
I want to comment on that as well. I mean, I remember
Yeah, go for it.
there was an incident in when France won the World Cup, and there was that incident where Macron said these guys are French, you know, and most of the players were black and in the team, and they were saying no, they're Africans and whatever, and I'm like, no, they're French. They actually are French. I mean, if you look at them, speak to them and stuff, they speak French and everything like that. They're from France and so forth. And I think that's what people are missing. Just because someone may look similar to you in terms of physical features doesn't necessarily mean that they will speak your language. I remember there's this one country in South America. They have Dutch as an official language, right?
I'm going to have to check that, man.
I just want to just Google it quickly, right? I just want to get the South America map.
While you're Googling, I just want to read here. So Graham McTaggart says, finally catch Caracal live and my man Dumo is on. Hell yeah. So there's a very nice comment there. Thank you very much. While Dumo is still checking there, I just want to check here in the comments if there's anything. Let's see here. Cool. All right. You wanted to say, Dumo? What's that country? Enlighten us.
Right. It's called Suriname, right? And very interesting.
I've never heard it. It's the first time I've ever heard that name.
So again, and you know, South America, there's a lot of ethnic varieties there. So I saw a guy who looked black, and he was doing some artist work, right? He was just painting something. But when he was speaking, I could hear, I'm like, is this guy colored? I didn't know this was guys from Suriname, but he was speaking Dutch, but I could hear what he was saying because I have some limited knowledge in Afrikaans.
Right.
And I was like, oh my goodness, where's this? Right? I thought this was probably Cape Town or something. Like, no, it's actually Suriname. And the guy was holding the phone was speaking Dutch, and I think he was from Holland or maybe from Suriname as well. And the whole point I was trying to show is that guy, if you looked at him and hear him speak and everything like that, you would say this guy's a South American from Suriname, and he is, that's where he grew up, and he's a product of that particular place. But that guy probably has no connection to Africa, zero, and probably doesn't even care, you know. Yeah. And I think that's the whole point. Is just that, and now going back to the Afrikaans community. I mean, they've been here, for over 200 years, longer than the United States has been around.
Yeah, I mean, I'm ninth generation of my family to be here.
Exactly. And if you look at my ancestors, they're not even from South Africa. If you want to, if you really want to use the political borders as some sort of
if you
way
to zoom out.
Yeah, I mean, they came from West Africa during the Bantu expansion as well. In fact, the ones that were originally was the Khoisan, but the Americans refer to them as pygmies, right? And they had conflicts with them. I mean, if you look at how the Xhosa tradition started.
That's why your native language of Xhosa has the clicking sounds, and it is through the interactions with the Khoisan as your ancestors migrated into the Southern African sphere.
Right, exactly. You know, and I think that is obviously before cultures became institutionalized, and you know, and so there was the free flow of ideas and languages was a bit I wouldn't say better, but just a bit less much more less restricted. Right, I'll put it that way. I don't think that even makes sense. Much more less restricted. No, it was. The free flow of ideas was less restricted because there was no recognized institutions, obviously. Obviously, when time went on, institutions started to form. But that's the whole point, is that when people move from one place to another and they interact with other people, their offspring are going to develop the culture of where they actually grew up in. And that's the fact. I mean, I've seen black people in Korea. They sound Korean. They sound like the Koreans, but they're black and they know nothing about Africa. You know, they know everything about Korea the same way another Korean would know.
The same goes for if you finish that thought first.
Yeah, no, that is the thought. Thanks. No, that is the thought.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I don't think any South African would, well, maybe one or two, but most South Africans wouldn't deny if you take an African American and you drop him anywhere in Africa, even in South Africa, he's going to stick out like a sore thumb. He's not going to know his left from his right. He's not going to know what's going on around him because he's going to think like, where am I? Why are these people around me so strange? Why don't they speak English? Why don't they have the same American values that I grew up with? What's this thing called muti? What's this thing? Why do they go to the witch doctor? Why do they do this and this and this? Right. He's going to be completely lost. But the same goes for if you just take, for example, a South African, specifically a rural South African that's very still entrenched in a lot of tradition, a lot of culture. You take that individual, you drop him in an American state. You can put him in a completely black community in America as well. He's also going to be completely lost. He's going to have nowhere to grab onto. He's not going to find any ground to stand on. He's just going to be a stranger in a strange land. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand. I think I may be going out on a limb, but I think South Africans understand that better than Americans do, that difference between Africa and America. But you see that conflict. You see, I mean, there's online wars between the Black Twitter in America and Black Twitter in South Africa, and you see that rift. Like, these two sides aren't going to sit around the same table.
Right. I mean, like, as I mentioned before, Tariq Nasheed was saying that he has this term called foundational Black Americans. So these are Black Americans who's, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's what he meant, was that their lineage was from slavery, right? And then the ones that come from, let's say, Africa and the Caribbean and so forth, they're not foundational Black Americans. So, and you know, and talking about like people getting lost, I mean, we as, okay, I don't know if you've noticed this, right? But there are these little shit tests, right? Sorry to swear, but I think that's the right way to say it. But I don't know how else to put it. But these little shit tests that us South Africans have. So, you know, for example, if you want to see if someone's a foreigner, we ask them like, where are their knees in Zulu or Xhosa? Where are their elbows? So they'll ask those type of questions, right? And just to see if this person's a foreigner. And it usually works, but sometimes it doesn't. So that's the whole thing.
Is this a test, for example, if a South African encounters a Malawian or a Namibian, and you can't tell immediately? Is that the test? Can you maybe just elaborate for people that are not familiar with this? So, how does the test work? How do you catch out the person and realize that, wait, this person is not from South Africa?
So basically what happens is you can tell. Okay, so when someone from Zimbabwe comes, right, and they speak Zulu, right, you can hear in their accent that it's got that Zimbabwean tinge. And when I say tinge, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. You can hear the Zimbabwean accent coming. It's strong. Now, what happens is sometimes you'll get this a situation, right, where someone would come in and he's speaking like, and this is, and I've seen this with Zulu people. They do this. I'm not saying Zulu people are notorious for this. Xhosa people do this as well. But I'll just give you a Zulu example. So what happens is,
man speaking ill of the Zulu culture. I mean, I'm shocked.
No, I just hear them do that, right?
You have to be careful. Mr. Sigle Ngubi says also in the chat he's going to have a word with you next time you're on his show as well.
So what will happen is he'll come through, and let's say he's speaking Zulu. He's speaking it, but they're like, "Aye, man, this one is not from here." So they will give them. So they'll do little shit tests. So the first one, they'll ask them to count in Zulu. So that's one way to know, because counting in Zulu is a very. If you look at the numbers, when people even speak Zulu, okay. Let me take one step back. But usually you'll hear when people say numbers and they speak in Zulu or Xhosa, they'll use the English numbers because it's less syllables. But if you use but if you use like the proper Zulu words for numbers, they can be incredibly long. Like it's just doesn't work well with when it comes to speaking, but they are there. So that's one thing they'll do. They'll ask you to count in a particular language using that, no English. And sometimes they'll ask where your elbows, But sometimes they'll point there and they'll be like yinle. What is that, right? Or they'll say zipindololwane. So indololwane is our elbows. Then what is it? They'll ask you those questions. And that's how they just test just to see if someone is actually from here. It's just it's a quick test, but sometimes these guys are very sharp. They stay in a community for a long time, and you think they're part of that community, but they actually, I wouldn't say they're not part of it, but they didn't grow up there. Some people are very good at adapting. They pick up the languages very quickly. Like I've got friends, I got a friend who is from Limpopo. He's Tonga, and he can speak Sotho. He can speak Zulu very well. And if you pretty much know Zulu, you can communicate with Xhosa people and Swati people and Ndebele and so forth. So there are those who are very, very good at adapting. But the foreigners you can pretty much see. So if the accent is not visible, if you can't, not visible or audible rather, if they're speaking it with an accent, then you ask them those questions. So we all do it. Xhosa people have their own one. Zulus have their own one. Tswanas have their old one.
And an African American's not even going to stand a chance. You don't even do the test.
you can see there, it's like it's clear as day. There, it's clear as day. So, I mean, I won't lie. Those shit tests were done on me as well because a lot of people thought I was Nigerian. Because I remember the one time when I was at Wits and I was applying for a course there, right? And then I went to the security and I spoke to them in English. And then they answered in English and so forth. And then I left. And then what happened was I was like, yo, but they looked at me kind of weird. I was like, what's going on? But then I forgot something and I came back. And then I just spoke to them in Zulu. And then they were like, oh, hey, bro, we thought you were from Nigeria and what because of the way you walk and whatever. And I was like, this is very interesting. And
now,
so it's
Dumo,
amazing.
how do you explain that to a foreigner? Like someone from Europe or America. How do you explain this to them? I mean, this is completely foreign, to use that word again, to them, to an American. They won't be able to wrap their head around what you're just describing here.
Yeah, they won't because they haven't been exposed to South Africa for a long period of time, right? And therefore they don't know the cultural dynamics, of everyday life, of how people actually interact with each other and so forth, right? So when they come here, they think, oh, because everybody's black, I'm gonna feel right at home. Like, nah, bruh, you're not. Like there's a lot of ethnicities here, and people are gonna ask you, what's your ethnicity? Especially if you sound South African. If you're American, they'll leave you alone. But let's say you have kids. Let's say you're an American and you come here and you marry a black. Let's say you marry a Xhosa woman, for example, because I used Zulus before. So you marry a formidable Xhosa woman, right? and there's stereotypes about Xhosa women as well. But I don't want to get too much into because I might get into trouble. But
you're gonna get some fan mail if you do that, man. But the spicy kind.
So you marry one, right? And let's say now your kids grow up and then they may know Xhosa because of the mom. But now, and let's say they can speak Xhosa fluently, right? Now here's the interesting part. Now, in the Xhosa tradition, right, there's this thing called Isduko. Isduko is your clan name, right? And it's different to your surname, okay? It's not the same. So mine is Tlesibe, right? Tlesibe is my clan name. But my
Odin has said in Tswana culture as well. I mean, he's the Kagabu clan.
Right. Now, check this out. Now, usually what happens is your clan name will come from your father's lineage, okay? Now, if your father's from America, right, speaks like an American, everything, comes back here, marries a Xhosa woman. Now there's a problem now. So does he? Now the question is, does he take the mother's clan name or the father's clan name? You know what I mean? So
but if he takes the mother's one, it's also strange. There's also going to be people saying like, wait a minute, this is also funny.
Yeah, so this is a thought experiment. Now, I'll ask my pops about this and ask him what happens in that situation.
What's the best rule of thumb? Yeah.
So I don't know. I think people are just going to sit down and just huddle and say, okay, the kids will take, or they might give him one, or they probably might say take the mom's one. I don't know. It might come to that point. But the point I was just trying to make here is that those type of dynamics in those cultural dynamics among black people. And the nice thing about it, Thomas Sowell recognized this as well, which I really appreciates it. Those dynamics are so, I wouldn't say complex, but they're so rich that I think if okay, let's say African American, just for the sake of being politically correct, had to come here and experience them, they would be very overwhelmed because of the fact that there's a lot of intricacies between them, between cultures and so forth. So I think, in my opinion, right, when it comes to those situations, I really do. I'm not saying black Americans must not come here and stuff. Fine, they can come here, but just understand.
But you're going to play on hard mode. It's not going to be easy.
Right. Because now you're going to see that different traditions, different cultures have different sort of traditions, and and you're gonna see the differences, and some you're gonna like, some you're not gonna like, some you're gonna hate.
Some are gonna confuse the hell out of you.
Right, and so I think. You can't just look at appearance anymore. It's a very very interesting thing. African culture is so rich, and that's why even George Ayittey, when he spoke about in ancient Ghana what they did with terms of economics and stuff like that. I mean, that's another thing that I also learned as well, because it's such a it's crazy how it's like almost like looking at. It's like science, looking at all these cells and everything like that, and just there's so many unique items. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and I've seen as well. I mean, as someone that grew up in South Africa since I was born, I can see if a white or black person is not from South Africa. I can't tell you why in many cases. If for example, let's say I tell you, okay, I can see that guy's from somewhere else in Africa, and someone asks me like, why? I'm gonna have to think about it. Instinctively, I know. But if you ask me, okay, but can you elaborate? I'm like, okay, now I'm going to have to think about it. Same with Europeans or American white people coming to South Africa. I can immediately see, well, sometimes not immediately, but many times, like 7 out of 10 times, the majority of times I can see, wait, this is a foreigner. This is not someone from South. This is not a guy. This is not Pete from Belleville. This is not is not this is not Sipu from Soweto. This is someone from Malawi or someone from Switzerland or someone from Texas or whatever. And it's like I said, it's almost like a sixth sense. It's not something I can explain. It's just something I know. But before we continue, before you comment on that, I just want to give some love to 2 super chats that we received. Paul Putter says, excellent chat, gents. Keep the dialogue going. Thank you very much for the super chat, Paul. Really appreciate it. Guardian Prepping says, good talk. Also gives a 35 Rand super chat. Thank you very much, Guardian Prepping. I really appreciate it. So yeah, Dumo, I don't know if you've got that sense as well, but wait, before we continue, before I forget, Sihle made such great comments that I want to incorporate into the show. So Sihle also said, it comes with our having built a nation state with a standing army. It changed us from a tribal clan mindset to a sense of nationhood forged in war and conquest. Yeah, that's the history of South Africa. Oh no, he's talking about Sihle is talking about the previous comment where he said Zulus are supremacists by nature. We literally believe we are the people of the heavens. Zulu means heaven in Nguli language. That's very interesting. I didn't know that. True. And then he adds to that, let me go back to that comment. Now it makes sense. He says, it comes with our having built a nation state with a standing army. It changed us from a tribal clan mindset to a sense of nationhood forged in war and conquest. Yeah, exactly. Now that makes sense. Sihle says, back to that topic where you talked about clan names. You said kids takes the mom's clan names in Zulu. It's in Zulu culture, it seems. I'm going to have to talk to maybe to Nzuzo sometime when he comes back on the show. Maybe you can enlighten me on that. Oh, yeah. Jonathan Kidd says something very interesting. He says the Zulu nation still remains the only nation to defeat a modern army who had guns. The Zulus only had spears, sharpened spear, Sihle. No, exactly. That's a very good point. And I remember there was this very wholesome story where when AfriForum representatives were invited to the Zulu King's birthday, may he rest in peace. We were invited there, not me personally, but representatives from AfriForum. I think it was Kali Kriel and Barend Ace and someone else, I think Flip Base. They went to his birthday and he was sitting there and he said, it is an honor to be in the presence of one of the few other tribes, and he was talking about the Afrikaners, to defeat the British Empire here in Southern Africa. And I thought that was just a very base comment to make. Before we
That's
continue,
proper.
Dumo, I just want to make sure there's not. I see. I actually want to put this comment there. Sihle, if you're still here in the chat, Sideline Opinions has a comment here that's very interesting, seeing it with your background as well. He says, so the Zulus see themselves as the Black Jews. Very, very interesting comment. I really want to hear what Sihle says there if he's still here. So Duma, yeah, I've covered a lot now. Is there anything that stuck out to you that you wanted to comment on?
I wanted to say something, but I actually forgot. So
So
look, I mean,
first it was the 2 super chats, and I'm just going through
yes.
the maybe it refreshes your memory,
Before
and then we
that,
went to Sihle. Oh, before that,
you were mentioning a point about that's Sixth Sense.
yes,
the Sixth
that's what we.
Sense.
Yeah, that's
Right.
what I mentioned before we got there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the Sixth Sense is actually something that we know based on how we have grown up and stuff. So, and there's another complexity as well. So again, you'll know, let's say, for example, let's say a Zulu person from KZN. From my experience, the way people speak Zulu in KZN is different to what
Just for
it's in Joburg.
Dumo, just for context, for my international listeners, KZN is the province of KwaZulu Natal. Just a little tidbit of context there, but please continue.
So you can hear when someone speaks Zulu if they're from KwaZulu Natal or if they're from Joburg. And the same thing, there was also one way of, and there's a joke that I made, right? So with Xhosa people, right? So I said one of the ways you can check if a Xhosa person's from the rural areas is when they see a dog, right? So when you in the rural areas in the Eastern Cape, when usually there's a lot of stray dogs there. And what happens is, for some reason, when people eat, they just eat outside. I don't know why. They don't eat inside. But they'll eat outside like on a nice sunny day and stuff. And then a stray dog will come past and want to eat your food.
Just grab one of your chops.
So some of them have learned the hard way. So they don't even try to grab it. They stay there hoping you're going to give them a bone, and then they run away. And then there's an expression. It's like mka, mka, mka. That's what they say to the dog. It's almost like saying futsak in Joburg to a dog. And then one way you know someone's from the Eastern Cape is when they say mka to a dog, because you'll never hear it or anywhere else in the country except there. So this is the thing as well. Even among the tribes, there's differences. Even like you can tell if this guy's from KZN, like a Zulu guy. If you grew up in Joburg or if you grew up in KZN, you can hear if someone's from the Eastern Cape. You can hear if they're from the Eastern Cape. If someone's from Cape Town, you can hear they're from Cape Town. And if someone's from Joburg, you can hear they're from Joburg. Because I remember I had a friend of mine who passed away in 2016. He is Xhosa, very proud Xhosa, but he grew up in Joburg, and what was very interesting, he said the one time when he was going through his rites of passage, which is known as Lwaluko. So that Lwaluko is that whole, you get circumcised and then you spend some time isolated and stuff like that. So what happened was when he went through his rites of passage, he actually went to the Eastern Cape to get it done. And he told me about the tensions among the other initiates that were there. Some of them were from the Eastern Cape.
Some of them were city guys.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's like rural Eastern Cape guys versus Joburg guys. And there were tensions that existed as well, because they could say, this one you can hear. Because like when you go there, you will find that there's specific slang that they use as well in the Eastern Cape that you would not be aware of if you didn't grow up there as well.
Zuzo said in Zulu culture, exactly the same thing happens, where you can also tell someone's from outside KwaZulu Natal. He's from Joburg, or he's from Pretoria, or he's from one of the big cities. And that's very fascinating. Before we continue there, I see Sihle has answered one of the Sideline Opinions' chat, but that's going to be lost in context because the conversation has moved on. So I'm going to have Sihle back on. We can actually chat a bit on one of my culture series to go back into Zulu culture a little bit. Sideline Opinion says something interesting. He says the Xhosas fought at least 7 border wars with the British on the eastern border. Yeah, no, that's also a fascinating piece of history. Eastern Cape, one of the most beautiful provinces in the country, and but a lot of war history there as well. Yeah, Sigle is giving a lot of context here, but yeah, Sigle, if you're listening, I'm going to have to invite you back for one of my culture series episodes, and we can actually get into that question. I think it's a little bit of a funny question, but it's also interesting at the same time. But yeah, so Duma, to continue what you said there, I mean, Afrikaner culture is exactly the same. When I moved to Pretoria from the Western Cape, people could immediately hear in my accent that I'm not from Pretoria. So when I say, for example, Môre, which means good morning, I'd say Môre, not. But in Pretoria, you say Môre. You kind of stretch the O.
Okay, I see.
Or you put like a little umlaut on the O. You put more emphasis on the O. Then people immediately hear that. You don't in the Western Cape. You talk about your ma and your pa, your mother and your father. In Pretoria, I'm going to sound a little stereotypical now, so forgive me, my Pretoria friends. You talk about your ma and your pa. So you get those little nuances, but you pick it up. You have that ear, and I can hear if someone comes from the Makwaland or from different parts of South Africa. The Durban Brew accent is not the Cape Town accent in the English community either. I can hear if someone's from Durban Brew. He just drinks some Castle Lights there at the electronic tent. Come get me there. And then from Cape Town is completely different. But that's the thing. You get these intra cultural differences as well. So not differences between the cultures, but differences within the culture that you can pick up. I mean, last year we went to visit some friends. We went to it for a birthday in the Northern Cape, and in the town of Katu. Now that's very far. It's like 6 hours from Pretoria, and because it's in the Northern Cape, I for the first time in months heard some Cape accents again. I'm like, that sounds familiar now, but now it stands out because I was surrounded by these accents my whole life, but now since I've been in Pretoria, I'm not as accustomed anymore. But yeah, no, that's a fascinating part about South Africa is that firstly, you've got all these cultural differences. Then you've got all these religious differences. Then you've got all these linguistic differences. And then within those languages and within those cultures, you have a rural urban divide and you've got a provincial divide. And it's fascinating. I mean, if you take, for example, let's say a family from Cape Town that is like fourth generation there, their forefathers came from the Eastern Cape and they went for work in Cape Town. They semi-migrated there. They're not going to be the same as another, for example, a Xhosa family that still lives in the Eastern Cape. You're going to hear that difference. You're going to hear their cultures have already started drifting a little bit apart. But you see this within all the cultures. You see it in the Zulu culture, as Nzuzo told me on our culture episode. I see it in my own culture, in Afrikaner culture. You just talked about in your own Xhosa culture how it happens. So it's definitely a phenomenon, and it's fascinating. And I mean, we're going into some complex stuff, but I mean, this stuff is too complex to explain to even to an American or to a European. I mean, let's leave this. Right. This is like university level stuff when it comes to cultural education. Let's stay with the primary school stuff of like, yeah, there exists Zulus and Xhosas. Let's get into why there exist these two groups and they're not the same. Or there exists English white South Africans and Afrikaners. Let's start with the basics. Why is there tension, or why is there love, or why is there a good relationship or a bad relationship between these two groups historically, and then we work from there. I mean, that's how I approach it when it comes to talking to, for example, Americans or Europeans about this stuff.
Right. Okay, yeah, it's a good approach. I think it's a good one. But I mean, I don't know. As a South African, I just love the complexities and explaining it to them. But I think maybe I might turn off a lot of Americans. Like, what is this guy saying? Like, what is he talking about? Who are these guys? Like, what is this place? What is that place? So,
yeah, they think the different cultures in South Africa are just like football clubs that you support. It's like, oh yeah, well, I support Chelsea and my friend supports Man United. That they see the difference between like a Zulu and a Xhosa as that. Like, oh yeah, you just support different football clubs. You wear different color jerseys. And you're a little bit angry at each other when your one team beats the other. That's their very simplistic view of like cultural differences in South Africa. And I have to tell them, like, no, between many cultures, if for example, with one person from one cultural group marries another one from another group, there's going to be tension. You're going to have to understand why. Right. It's going to be very strange for you. I mean, it's getting less and less as South Africa, for example, urbanizes more, as many people leave rural areas. But I mean, you can probably also, from your own experience in South Africa growing up here, tell of experiencing this, where there's a marriage over a cultural divide, and then there's tension between the two families. And how do you explain that to a person from, for example, America, where there's a very homogenized culture compared to South Africa?
Yeah, I think that's another thing about South Africa. We're not as homogenous as, let's say, Denmark,
Yeah,
Norway,
or
or,
Switzerland, or
or
even America. I think the difference between a Texan and a Californian, there's definitely a difference, but those two oaks their differences are gonna be much smaller than the difference
right,
between a Chonga and a Venda. I mean, this is
exactly,
the cultural differences are going to come down to much more important and big things, like what
right,
values do you prioritize, there's going to be worldview differences, there's going to be heritage and historical differences, there's going to be linguistic differences and cultural differences, but like heavy cultural differences when it comes to traditions and practices. Excuse me. But when it comes to different states in America, I mean, there's different states that have big differences, but it's never going to be, from my experience, on the level between two states in America than that you get through between many cultures in South Africa. I mean, there's some cultures that still have like 500-year-old blood feuds in South Africa. Like, yeah, no, we don't like these guys because their
exactly.
ancestor 500 years ago betrayed us.
Exactly, and I think that's another layer to the complexity as well. Is that I think these differences, it can just get so complex very quickly, and I think ultimately, this is another thing that affects the politics. It also affects who people choose to marry as well, and so forth. Like, I know a friend, he's Zulu, and he said, look, I dated a white woman, but you know what, I just like a Zulu woman. And a lot of guys teased me and said, oh, are you the type of guy that'll date a white woman? And I'm like, I don't know, I really don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I if I had to get married, it most probably would be a closer woman, because that's just what I've known, right? So,
but I mean, that's
a
a very deep personal thing. That's not something you can just explain in 5 minutes to a person, or like even on a stream like this. I don't think you would be able to just get into. That's something very deeply personal, something very deeply cultural, and it's something that I think even if you were to think about it, you're going to first struggle a little bit in regards to, okay, where's this coming from? Why do I have this gut cultural instinct when it comes to many issues? I mean, in the Afrikaner culture, you see it as well. The reaction of an Afrikaner to a certain issue will be different from the reaction of like a white English South African to a certain issue. It doesn't mean that's the case in every case, but it is a trend. A good example would be farm murders. Dirk Herman from Solidariteit made an excellent point a few years ago. He said, the thing about why all Afrikaners care about the issue of farm murders is because in Afrikaner culture, all of us know someone that lives on a farm, live on a farm ourselves, have a friend that lives on a farm, or a family member that lives on a farm, or lives in a farming community. So everyone is connected to the farm or to farming somehow. That's just how our culture was formed. That's the nature of our culture. That's why you see disproportionate, very strong feelings when it comes to the issue of farm murders, is because of that cultural connection to agriculture and farming. That doesn't say that people of other cultures don't care about the issue. It's identifying a trend. Why is there disproportionately within this one group a different reaction to an issue than to another? And I think, for example, another example would be, for example, that the whole debate surrounding initiation ceremonies in South Africa. Some people would argue, oh no, it's something from the past that should be abolished. Other people will feel very strongly about it and say, no, this is our heritage, this is our culture. But a person from that culture will feel much stronger about, hey, we can't just be trivial about this. This is something that goes back hundreds of years. We can't just frivolously throw it away because we don't like it today. While an outsider from outside of that culture, or someone that has no connection to that culture, will look at that tradition and say, "Oh, I don't see the use in this. I see it as actually harmful." So you get that disconnect. So the person, again, a person, for example, from a culture that practices that tradition is going to be disproportionately invested in that issue and in that debate. They're going to say, when the debate comes up, should this be abolished? They're going to be the first person that instinct, almost from their gut feeling, is just going like, whoa, this is a serious matter. We can't just debate this on Twitter. This is something that really takes a lot of thought, because this is something very personal and something very deeply held in our culture. And yeah, that pretty much sums up my point there about in a country like South Africa, you will have different issues that different cultures and groups react differently to because of the nature of their culture.
Right. I totally agree with that. Right. So I've got two examples. So I remember there was this joke, right? Where there were South African rap artists, right? And then this one guy said, I don't understand why South African rap artists, because there was some guy who made a song, and he made a song about the police, like how he hates the police, right? And then obviously this is obviously something that came from American culture. And this one guy's like, bro, your uncle's a police officer. Like every black person in South Africa has a relative who's in the police force in some way. So why are you disparaging, saying, the cops are coming after us? I mean, the cops are black. Most of them are black anyway. So that's the first one. So that's a disconnect as well. I think that even if you had to try and port American stuff into it, it just doesn't work. And the second one is that there's even, now that you mentioned about these personal issues now, so like, if you look at initiation ceremonies, I mean, if you look, when you go to the Eastern Cape, right, there's this newspaper called the Daily Dispatch. And it is very interesting because, when I would go there in December, you would find a copy of the Daily Dispatch and you just read it. And the stories there about initiation schools and what's happening there and stuff, it brings up quite a lot of debate, because this is something that's been going on for a long time. Now, it's not like as if some Westerner came and said, hey, there's a problem with this ceremony, or there's a problem with this practice. Like, there have been even people who practice that tradition who have actually questioned it as well. I was reading one story about one chief who actually banned it within his family because both of his sons died. And this happened like in the 1800s sometime. So even those differences among, let's say the people, among closer people exist. And it's a big topic of debate. That's why you'll find some people, when they practice Lwaluko, they do it differently. So some will actually say, okay, fine, if you want to get circumcised, then go to the hospital. And then, or some people say, well, use this person or that person or whatever. Or some will say, go to initiation school. And that's really those differences do exist. And those debates do occur a lot. And then now, obviously, the West has kind of thrown another span into the works, because now they're asking whether if circumcision is actually moral and everything like that. So that's another issue altogether. So, but yeah, it becomes very deep and personal, because a lot of people take a lot of pride in those ceremonies. Because remember, it's someone going from boyhood into manhood. So,
and most cultures have a similar type of tradition, or something that they do that marks that transition from boy to man.
Right, and people see you differently as well. So
you come out the other side differently. You're almost transformed by that tradition. That's why it's practiced.
Right, and I think I'm not going to comment whether it's good or bad, but it's very impactful. Right, it's a very impactful event, and people take it very seriously. So, yeah. I just wanted to mention that, right? That about just really the personal, how people take culture personally. Yeah.
And I see I wanted to read this that adds to the topic as well. Dagbreker says, I dated a girl from Cape Town. It did not work because I'm from the north. We had very different worldviews. I married a woman from my environment, much more peaceful. Well, that's don't underestimate that cultural impact. It doesn't mean that you can't have cross-cultural marriages, that it will always fail. Right. But there is something there. You need to realize that when you're marrying someone, you're marrying their family as well, and their extended family, and their worldviews and their values and their priorities from a cultural perspective might differ from yours, and that can cause friction. I mean, that's a real thing. It's not just something people make up. Sihle Ngobise says, hit that like button, folks. Get them up. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that, Sihle. Sideline Opinions says, yes, Sihle, the politicians want to make us cultureless, atomized individuals. Yeah. Sihle also says, South Africans genuinely are quite tolerant of each other's culture. In fact, this is what pisses off politicians. We don't go out of our way to hate each other. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, that's true.
That's the general. That's the general experience. RT Panda says this has been a great stream. We've learned quite a bit here this evening. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your nice comment and for letting us know. It's I can't believe it's already been an hour. I mean, I just checked the clock, which means I'm
Graham's
going to have to start. The latest one is sometimes if you don't go to the mountain, you sit at the kiddies table.
Guys, I'll give you an example. I've seen this happen, guys. I went to a ceremony where one was actually going from boyhood to manhood. And what happened was there was a guy who didn't go. And he sat with the children. I found that to be a bit dehumanizing. I'm just like, because now that I think back, now that I think back at it, yes, you're enforcing the culture.
Did he get a kiddies meal as well?
No, well, they gave him some food. So okay, how it worked, right? So this was very interesting how it worked there, because my brother and I went, and so they weren't serving food like on plates. So they had these little metal bowls, right? No, sorry, big metal bowls. And then they killed an animal, right? By animal, I think it was a sheep, and they slaughtered it and everything. So what they did was they just cook it, and then they don't put any spices in it. And then what happens is they give you a piece, they give the next guy a piece, and another guy a piece. And then there's another guy who's holding salt. And then you take your piece of meat, and then you show him your piece of meat, and you put salt on it, and then you eat it right there on the spot. So basically what happened was they made him go to the one where the kids were at, right? And that was pretty embarrassing. I felt that was like, hey guys, come on, you can just come eat with us. And they're like, no, you must go there. Yeah. You know, we went through the process, so that's why we're here. This guy must go there. So it's a very interesting thing. It doesn't happen all the time.
It sounds like a joke,
but it does happen. Some people
Graham
enforce it. Some people
don't. Well, maybe he was being serious. Maybe Graham has some insight.
No, Graham.
The story.
No, Graham knows. Graham knows. He knows. I've seen it. For me, I only seen it once, but that does happen sometimes. Some people, they keep it a secret, but there's also other complexities as well, because I think what also happens is, let's say in the township, for example, a lot of people, they grow up without fathers. And then what happens, they know that their father was closer, but then usually it's the father who kind of takes charge of their child going into this transition. Now, if there's no father to do it, then, who's going to do it? You know what I'm saying? So it doesn't happen. So these guys become 40, 50 years old, but they don't actually go through it. Not to say that they should, but that becomes a massive problem, especially when they want to get married as well. If they want to get married, the first question they're going to ask is, well, have you done it?
Have you gone to the mountain? Yeah.
Have you done the bits, man? And and if they say no, then they'll say, well, if you want to marry her, you have to do the bits. You know what I mean? So you got to go in. Well, they don't say do the bits. I'm just saying do the bits is just a way to say go to the mountains and stuff, right? But you know what I mean? So that's what happens, right? So it's really sad. That's another aspect that has really killed it in some sense. But usually, if there's a closer guy, has a strong father, he's going to tell the kids you're going to have to go through it. But if there's no dad around, no one does it. And sometimes you'll find that if the father has, let's say, a brother who's deceased, and the kids haven't gone through it, then that guy will make sure the kids go through it. So that's what tends to happen. But on a broader scale, it doesn't happen to everybody, unfortunately, because not everyone has that type of strong influence or strong men in the family to actually ensure that actually occurs, which is a downside.
You need to tell more funny stories. The audience is spiking the amount of people watching. You seem to be captivating and gripping people here. But yeah, I'm going to have to start wrapping up here. So Seamus O'Blaine says, all our cultures are being trampled by the homogenizing mental and cultural process. Yeah, we shouldn't all just be culturally the same. I think all the cultures need to be preserved. I mean, it's as MP van Wyk Lowe said, the cultures of the world are all instruments in God's symphony, and if one culture dies out, that's an instrument that never plays again. What are your thoughts on Sikhle's comment here? He says Xhosas can be very pedantic about this. They really go hard on this issue. Yeah, that's why I brought it up. I think it's something that perfectly illustrates what me and Dumo have been talking about for most of this episode. I might have to go change a little bit to the description because we've gone very deep into this cultural topic, but I love it. It's my favorite episode of the year so far. But I mean, we're going to see what other conversations are. But Dumo, before we get to the final thoughts, where I'm going to also plug your podcast, I also just want to thank the sponsor of the show, and that is Bitvice. Bitvice is the only place in South Africa that sells Bitcoin directly to your self-custody, meaning that unlike a traditional crypto exchange, you don't have to trust anyone to hold your Bitcoin for you. This removes the largest risk associated with Bitcoin. If you're interested in learning about Bitcoin, check out their podcast, By the Horns, which is available on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. They release weekly episodes and focus specifically on the South African context surrounding Bitcoin. And then also the Bitvice team has been hard at work making some changes to their product over the past few months. You may remember that their minimum purchase size was 20,000 Rand, but that has been reduced to 5,000 Rand recently. You can now buy Bitcoin directly to your hardware wallet in a matter of seconds. So there's a link in the description there. If you've been thinking about getting into crypto, I've had some questions surrounding it. These are the guys to ask. So there's a link in the description. Go check them out. So Dumo, thank you very much for a really good episode. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I wish we could go longer, but I also have some other responsibilities to get to. I can't just have the life of a streamer constantly. But do you have some final thoughts that you want to share with the audience, that maybe to leave them with to think about a little bit regarding what we talked about here tonight?
Right. Hey, I haven't thought about it, but I'll just say it's on my mind.
Just speak from the heart.
Okay.
All right. It's not a speech in front of thousands of people. It's just speak your mind.
All right, no problem. All right, Ernst, first of all, thanks for having me on. I really appreciated it. I know we digressed, but I really enjoyed the chat.
It was a great digression.
Yes, a great digression. You know, a few weeks ago, I didn't know that was a word, but now I know it's a word.
I don't know if it's a word. it just sounds correct.
Exactly. Anyway, so so guys, I think with regards to culture, I think they are very useful. That's what I think. And I think it's also good to understand cultures, because it actually helps you understand how many people will think or feel about certain topics and certain practices and how they view life as well. So just learn about it, try interact. Just, if you know someone from a different tradition, don't just befriend them for the sake of that. But if you end up, knowing someone who's from a different culture, take some time just to learn about what they believe and why they believe it, and stuff like that. And I think
it gives you a lot of conversational material. I mean, for example, our chat now has been an hour and it felt like 10 minutes. It's interesting stuff. I feel enriched by talking to other people from different cultures.
Right, and it's helpful. It's helpful, guys. It's really cool. I mean. And I think that's the final thought. Just try to learn a little bit more, and you'll be surprised what you will hear.
Yeah, no, Dumo, that's an excellent way to end it. Before we say goodbye, I just want to read some comments here at the very end. So Sideline Opinions says, thank you, Dumo and Aaron's, for a great conversation with a very jovial vibe, despite your cultural differences. You show us the way to go. Keep up the good work, guys. Well, thank you very much for your long, detailed, and very, very uplifting comment. Hardy Dave says, Lord have mercy, farewell soldiers. And then Flakvark says, great show, guys. Thank you very much, Flakvark. Paula Kernan says, it was so interesting. Thank you. Thank you very much for tuning in. Sichle, thank you for all your very interesting and insightful comments. I'm going to have to invite you back on the show. We've got a few things to discuss. But Sichle says, Mooi julle, baie dankie. Well, baie dankie, Sichle. that you tuned in tonight. Graham says that was very cool. Thanks, guys. Thank you for tuning in, Graham. Jonathan Kidd says great show, guys. JC Randolph says thanks, guys, and then also Hindo says lekker live stream, interesting. So yeah, thank you very much for tuning in, everyone. Your comments have been incredible. If you're new to this channel, I don't think our audiences are so much alike. I don't think anyone's going to discover my channel now. But if you are new, you like these type of conversations, you can subscribe. You can also leave a like. That helps out the show. If you're watching and the show is over, you're not watching live, you can always still leave your comments, your thoughts in the comments. I read them all, respond to as many as I can. So cheers, guys. Have a good one. Dumo, I hope you have an excellent evening and the rest of the week. Cheers, guys. Have a good one and God bless.